Today we're going to be learning about a diagnostic assessment that will help us form instructional goals and even groups for RTI within an MTSS system for our students. The assessment is one that I call the LILS. It stands for Letter Identification and Letter Sounds, and it does exactly what the name says it does. So it's helping us see if students are able to identify letters by naming them, and if they know the sounds of letters. So on the left, we have the form for the person administering the assessment, and on the right, we have the student form. There are two versions of this assessment, and I'll go through both of them with you. They're very similar, so I'll just point out the differences of the second one. But the main thing is the main reason there are two forms is the first one here is to be used with students up to the middle of grade 1. So I do not recommend using this assessment with students in grade 2 or even at the end of grade 1. I would recommend the other version for that. And again, I'll go through why in just a moment. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to sit across from your student. You're going to have this form in front of you hidden so they can't see what you're doing. I recommend putting it on a clipboard or maybe on a book on your lap and angling it away from them. The directions for what you say are right on the sheet where it says say. So I'm just going to go through the form and how to administer it for students and tell you what responses that we're looking for. So first thing you do is you say, I'm going to show you letters in a mixed up order. You may see the same letter more than once in a different font. Start here. Then you're going to point to the letter M. Go across and down, just like when we read. So you'll motion with your finger and you'll drag it across, and then you'll bring it down to this line and say, just like when we read. Point to each letter and tell me the name of the letter, not the sound. So you are able to tell students these are uppercase, and you are able to tell them that this is lowercase. But the main thing that we're looking for here is, can the student identify the letters? So just be careful, because even when I first started giving this, I would give the first one away. I would say, start at the letter M, and then I'd go, oops, oh darn. So just make sure when you're giving the directions, you point to the letter and you say, start at this letter. Don't say start at the letter M, because then you're giving them an answer, and we don't know if they can identify that letter or not on their own. So the student will go through M, Z, S, R, X, A, K, H, E, and so on and so forth. And as the student's doing it, you can either leave it blank, or I've had some teachers say they love to do the checks and circle one students say wrong, or even right next to it if they said something else. So if the student said V for that, I would put a V. If they said J, put a J. So it's however you want to mark it up that makes sense to you. But once it gets kind of covered in writing, it can get kind of hard to follow. So I personally leave it blank if they marked it correct. And if they got it wrong, I circle the one that they got wrong, or the letter they got wrong. And then I write next to it what the student said to make sure I have it captured. In this second section here, we have lowercase letters. So same thing, you can say to the student, you might see different font. There was not different font up in the uppercase, but there is down in the lowercase. So even as young as kindergarten, students start seeing different font. They might see the Q with the tail or without the tail. They might see the Y, that's the straight lines, or they might see the curled tail Y. It depends on the decodables that are being put in front of them, the curriculum that they're being exposed to, and you'll find that a lot of students think that this Y is actually a V, and you need to explicitly teach them placement of letters within lines and show them the tail. So that's just good information to know, because if we don't know this, that means every time students are seeing that letter, they're thinking it's a V, which is very confusing for them. This next part focuses on letter sounds. So we're going to say, I'm going to show you letters in mixed up order. Give me the sound of the letter, not the letter name. And I just do the same thing where I have the student point, show me where they're going to begin. We go down and across to make sure they know what they're doing, and then we go. So I'm going to say each letter sound as it's presented on the sheet. So just so you can hear the sounds. I've had teachers ask me to articulate them for them. So this is what we want the student to say. K, s, m, f, t, s, b, k, d, z, p, g, j, w, x, r, v, n, j, l, h, y. So those are the sounds that we want our students to say when we're pronouncing them. Now, you're going to find that a lot of students add the sound. We need to explicitly teach them clipping. So a student might say ka, sa, ma, fa, ta. And see how I'm just adding the here? So, if they're adding it to every single one, it might be easier as you mark it to just say, oh, they're doing it all the time. And so you can just add a little note, adds, student adds the The other thing that you could do is what I was just doing. Maybe they say k, s, ma, t, sa, b, k, da. Maybe they're only doing it on certain ones, so you can mark it like that. And again, this just is information to help us understand if we need to teach them clipping or not. And this matters because you'll see students who say ma, fa, ta, sa, ba, and then when they go to spell, they're adding the letter U to everything. So mat might be spelled as M-U-A-T, or even M-U-A-T-U, because they're saying ma, ta. So I like to write it, it's just, you don't have to, but it's just information that's helpful. So when it shows up in your spelling, you could look at this and go, oh, well, that makes sense because they think the sound is ma. And so, of course, they're spelling it M-U. So, yeah, just something to take note of. Now, what you'll see, I just gave you all the correct sounds, but what you'll see is a lot of students don't provide these sounds when they're doing this assessment for the first time. And especially, in kindergarten, they're not gonna know those yet, but in most curriculum, these sounds are taught in first grade, so that's why it's on here. So you're not going to mark the student wrong if they're in kindergarten and they haven't learned those letter sounds yet, but it is just good to know, and for comparative data between kindergarten and first grade to learn if they're retaining what they're learning. But what you'll most likely see students do is they'll say k, f, t, and just keep going. They're not going to give you both sounds at once. So I don't interrupt the student. I let them just do this entire section. Usually these two sounds are not given. And so then I bring them back and I point to the letter C and I said, you said C says k. That is correct. It has a second sound. Do you know it? And then I see if the student can give it to me. Then I do the same thing when I am down here. I bring them down to the G and I point at G and I say, you said G says G. That is correct. It has a second sound. Do you know it? And I'll see if the student can say J, and if they can or they can't, I just mark it with a check or an X. So maybe they didn't know this one. Or if you prefer to circle instead of do the X to mark that they didn't know it, that's fine. You can circle it. Let's say they knew this soft sound of C and they didn't know J. My sheet might look like that. Again, I get way too overwhelmed when my whole sheet is covered in all of these marks everywhere. And so I like to just leave it blank if they got it correct, but that is me personally. So next down here, you'll see students possibly do what they did up here where they say qua, f, sh, and they don't give the two sounds of TH. The most common one that students give first is the unvoiced one. So you might have to do the same thing that you did with C and G and just bring them back and say, you said TH says, that is correct. Do you know its second sound? So you just bring them back to it. Now, this last part with the vowels is a little bit tricky. So for these sections here, I just let the student go. I point them in the direction, start here, give me the letter sounds, and I just let them go and do their thing. Then I bring them back to these, like I said, after. But if you just let them go for the vowels, especially for students who have Spanish as their first language, or, they're still not fluent yet. They're still learning the vowel sounds. If you just let them go, they'll say things like E for I, E, ah, eh, ah, and I'm like, wait, which one are we on here? And so what I have found is it's really helpful for me to guide the student in this section. So I do it like this. I say, give me as many sounds for these letters that you know. And then I point to the letter I and I say, this letter I has 2 sounds. Do you know them? And I see if they can give me the sounds. Let's say they say it and I go, great. And I put my check marks. And then I go to the next letter. I say, U has 3 sounds. Do you know any of them? And they might say and U. A lot of times students don't know this long vowel sound, oo, for you. That's usually the one that's missing. Then I go to the next one and I point and I say, E has 2 sounds. Do you know any of them? They might say and then let's say they say a or something. I'll mark it like this. And I go to the next one. A has 2 sounds. Do you know any of them? Maybe they say aw and they say a. So it'll look like that. And the last one, I point and say, O has 2 sounds. Do you know any of them? They might say ah, and let's say they say ooh. So I put the ooh. So my sheet might look like that. So at the end of this assessment, you have so much knowledge and understanding of the student's ability for letter naming and, what's confusing them, what things you need to teach, what letter sounds they're still mastering. The other thing that I like to do is if there's a self-correct, that's fine. So let's say the student these are next to each other on purpose. I know it seems kind of mean, but I do that on purpose because when students who aren't automatic yet, they see the Z and they might say S and then they look at this one and then they go back and they fix it. Because it's right next to it. And so it's really helpful, I have found, to just place it next to one another so they have the opportunity to show if they can fix it or not. And so it might look like this. If the student says M, S, I'll circle this and put my S, and then they look at S and say S, and then they go, oh no, wait, this one is Z, then I'll just do my self-correct next to it. SC for self-correct. That's what I personally do. And that isn't marked wrong. So when you're adding up, how many they know or need, then you're not going to mark it as 25 because they were able to do it. But you might want to take note, like something like this. I put NA for not automatic. I mean, it's kind of obvious with the self-correct. So if it feels redundant, you don't have to write that. But the other thing is if the student is staring at a letter for a really long time, let's say they're going pretty quickly, M, Z, S, R, X, A, K, and then they just stop and they're staring and staring and staring, and then they say H, I might circle H and just put not automatic next to it. So what that means is when the student is reading, they have to put a lot of cognitive effort into identifying that letter. And so every time they have words with that letter that's automatic, they're stopping and thinking, what's that? What is that letter? Which is going to hinder their reading ability. So it's just good to take note of that. And automaticity is 3 seconds or less. So I'm always looking for 3 seconds or less for this. Again, you don't have to go to that level. I'm just showing you all of the things that you can do with this tool. So now I'm going to show you the other version, which is what I recommend using with students beyond the middle of grade 1. So I'll open that one up next, and I'll show you the differences here. So for students who are beyond the middle of grade 1, the main difference here is there's just more font types, because we know that students can learn different fonts starting in the middle of grade 1, but we need to explicitly teach font to them. So I'm not going to go through pronouncing and everything like I did in the last one. I'm just going to show you the main differences here. So this is, great to test students who are in middle school or high school, or like we really want to make sure they know font. So I put them next to each other on purpose, and all of these tools have been tested with hundreds of students. This one was made in 2021, so it's in its 4th year now of being used across multiple schools in elementary, middle, and high school settings, and we always get really good data that helps us form instructional groups and goals for our students. So the L, the different fonts for L and I are all next to each other on purpose. So you'll see students who are struggling like pause there, and they might even look at you and say, wait, what? This doesn't make sense. And you just tell them these are capital letters or these are uppercase letters. Just try your best. And they might laugh and go, what? And you're like, just try your best. But you'll see students who are struggling say L, and they'll look at you and go, L? And you're like, I don't know, like, keep going. And then they might, hopefully they'll say I. They usually recognize this I with the lines on the top and the bottom of it. So it's amazing to me how many times I've sat in a room giving this to students, and they tell me that this letter here is an L. And I say, remember, it's a capital letter. That's an L. And they say, yes. And then I point to an exit sign. We all know that exit sign, right? The bright orangey red exit sign. And there's usually many in school, so it's often that I'm assessing in a room that has one. And I'll point to it and say, well, what's this letter? And they'll say L. And I'm like, whoa. And I've had high school students do that. And as I've taught teachers, they have picked up on students doing that. And so it's really important to know that, in the world around them, they're not recognizing letters in their everyday world. So we want to explicitly teach that to them. The other thing that's on this assessment that is not on the first one I showed you is the fonts for A and G. You see the differences here? The Roman numeral A and G coming in. But we still have the different Q's, and we still have the different Y's on here. So those are what are added, the A's and the G's. Let's see, is there anything else? Nope, I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's everything. Yep, and this one says down here, middle of grade 1 and beyond. So that's how you can tell the difference between the two. So I hope that this video was helpful to you, and as all of my materials in my videos, you can find them on my website. This one is a free resource, so if you go to rootliteracydesign.com, you will find a resources tab, and if you click that, you'll find a drop-down menu, and it says free resources, and both of these assessments are on there. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope these were helpful for you.